June 13, 1971, newsrooms across America freeze. The New York Times splashes classified government secrets across its front page. The Pentagon Papers. Decades of Vietnam War deception exposed to the world, all with one leak. This was not just a leak. This was the US government caught in a web of lies spanning 4 presidents. The Pentagon Papers revealed years of deliberate deception about the Vietnam War's progress, cost, and very purpose. An institution entrusted to defend democracy had undermined it from within, and the shockwaves reached every corner of American society. Why does this matter? Because it wasn't just about policy blunders. It was about trust shattered on a national scale. 57,000 Americans dead, tens of billions spent, and a democracy deliberately misled by its own leaders. The Pentagon Papers scandal called into question the very notion of government accountability and truth. Rewind, the mid-1960s to early 70s. The Cold War is raging, the Vietnam War intensifying, and presidents from Truman to Johnson escalate involvement while maintaining a front that victory is within reach. Behind closed doors, the Department of Defense commissions a secret history, thousands of pages chronicling decisions, blunders, and outright lies. Key figures: Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon. In the shadows, analyst Daniel Ellsberg, the man who would blow the whistle. The perpetrators? The highest echelons of American power. 4 U.S. presidents: Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson. Senior military officials and architects within the Department of Defense. These were men entrusted with war strategy, public messaging, and above all, the nation's trust. Their authority was near absolute, their secrecy impenetrable. Their motivations were layered: fear of communist expansion, concern for American credibility on the world stage, and above all, domestic political survival. They doubled down on flawed policies, not from ignorance, but from a calculated effort to avoid admitting failure. The narrative was managed not for strategy, but for optics. How did they do it? Altered reports, buried casualty counts, manufactured optimism, and a classified 7,000-page report charting deception as a strategy. Congressional inquiries were stonewalled, dissenters silenced, critical information bypassed the public and even Congress. What they didn't anticipate was the internal revolt. As the war dragged on, a few close to the secrets began to question not just the strategy, but the lies themselves. The avalanche of documentation became too vast to fully control, and whistleblower conscience created a breach. Enter Daniel Ellsberg, a former Marine and respected Pentagon analyst. With first-hand access to the classified report and growing moral anguish, Ellsberg made the agonizing decision: the truth must come out. He reached out to trusted journalists and initiated one of the boldest leaks in American history. Ellsberg photocopied the classified documents, thousands of pages, from his Rand Corporation office. These became the backbone of the New York Times expose and subsequent publications by the Washington Post and others. The evidence was irrefutable: presidential memos, internal assessments, and smoking gun summaries showing officials knew the war was unwinnable long before the public did. But the risks were immense. Ellsberg faced charges under the Espionage Act, with decades in prison on the line. The government's legal machine moved swiftly: raids, surveillance, threats, and relentless attempts to silence the press. Journalists faced injunctions and court battles that threatened the First Amendment itself. The primary victims were not policymakers, but the American people and Vietnamese civilians, those sent into a war based on false premises, those who lost loved ones, those who believed the official story. Billions of taxpayer dollars were squandered, and institutional honesty was irreparably damaged. For years, Americans were told steady progress was being made. The government promised victory was within sight. The Pentagon Papers revealed a diametrically opposite reality. Officials privately doubted victory, strategized primarily for political image, and knew the cost in lives was far greater than admitted. By the time of the expose, tens of billions of taxpayer dollars had funded a war whose ultimate purpose came to be questioned. The economic drain was massive: resources diverted, debts incurred, social programs starved, all under false pretenses. While Ellsberg was prosecuted as a criminal, the greater legal and ethical violation was by those in power, misleading Congress, the press, and the public, violating constitutional processes, and abusing institutional secrecy to hide failures and wrongdoing. Lawsuits flew in both directions, against the leaker and for press freedom. Power rested with those who lied, but accountability proved elusive. None of the Seymour officials faced criminal charges for the deception. Presidential immunity, classified status, and political calculations shielded the top decision-makers almost entirely. The whistleblower, meanwhile, faced the full weight of prosecution, until illegal government actions in his case led to a dismissed trial. Media became the battleground for American democracy. The New York Times and Washington Post risked legal ruin to publish the truth. Initial skepticism turned to journalistic heroism as the Supreme Court, in New York Times Co. versus United States, sided with press freedom and against government censorship. Faith in the American government was shattered. The Pentagon Papers confirmed many citizens' worst fears: democracy betrayed and power corrupted at the highest levels. Worst suspicions: their leaders had systematically lied, not just in error, but by design. Trust in institutions reached new lows, and the age of political cynicism began in earnest. The cover-up extended over decades, involving not only document classification, but systematic misrepresentation to Congress, the media, and the public. It required coordination between military intelligence, political strategists, and presidential aides. In the end, conscience, leaks, and journalism cracked the facade. Long before the leak, some insiders and journalists sensed that the official narrative didn't add up. Battlefield reports contradicted press releases, casualty figures seemed manipulated, and military briefings veiled more than they revealed. At the height of the deception, officials pushed the notion that the war was winnable, with just a few more troops, more bombing, more time. Bills were passed, budgets increased, new offensives launched, each under a banner of false optimism. By the late 1960s, as protests grew and the human cost mounted, whistleblowers inside the government began to question their silence. Ellsberg, after attending anti-war protests and reading classified accounts, realized the narrative had to be challenged. Then came June 1971. The first Pentagon Papers stories hit. Panic swept Washington. The Nixon administration sought injunctions, press rooms buzzed with fear and resolve. Instead of suppressing the story, government legal action made the crisis explode into every American living room. The Nixon White House authorized illegal break-ins to discredit Ellsberg. Injunction after injunction was filed. Evidence was shredded, dissenters were monitored, and political operatives, later known as the plumbers, were unleashed. But the documents were out. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of publication. Congressional hearings followed, public anger ignited, and a precedent for whistleblower courage and press freedom was set for generations. The heart of the Pentagon Papers scandal, a systematic, years-long campaign of lies by the highest officials, leading a nation into war while suppressing the true scale, cost, and unwinnability of the conflict. The answer: institutional secrecy, a compliant media at first, lack of oversight, and an overwhelming national security narrative that silenced doubters. Ultimately, one man's conscience broke the seal. Ellsberg's release of the documents, careful verification by journalists, and the willingness of the press to defy governmental threats did what Congress and oversight could not: expose the truth. Justice was, at best, uneven. No senior officials were charged for lying to the nation. Ellsberg, facing life in prison, was freed only after massive government misconduct was exposed. Congressional oversight increased, but institutional accountability remained tantalizingly incomplete. What decided the outcome? Three things: Ellsberg's courage, the physical proof locked in the Pentagon Papers themselves, and the willingness of major newspapers to risk it all for the truth. Had the cover-up held, the lies would have persisted, new wars may have followed the same script, and institutional rot would have grown unchecked. Public cynicism might have turned to public apathy or complete disillusionment with democracy. In a world of real accountability, those who orchestrated the deception would have faced prosecution. Institutional reforms would have been sweeping, and trust in government could have been rebuilt on the foundation of repentance, not secrecy. Compared to later scandals, Watergate, Iran-Contra, the Iraq WMD debacle, the Pentagon Papers set the template: high-level deception, whistleblower breakthroughs, fierce institutional resistance, selective justice, and the press as the last line of defense. Congress passed the War Powers Act, shifting some authority from the president to the legislature. Yet, institutional trust was never fully restored, and the lesson that secrecy breeds disaster remains relevant. Often repeated, rarely learned. Based on overwhelming documentary evidence, 4 White House administrations actively misled the public about the Vietnam War. Daniel Ellsberg's leak, the relentless work of journalists, and the ultimate publication forced the truth into daylight, shattering myths, destroying careers, but saving the public's right to know. It's tempting to blame individuals alone, but the Pentagon Papers reveal a systemic pattern of institutional deception, enabled by collective silence, political incentives, and a culture of unquestioning loyalty that choked dissent. While no president or senior official was prosecuted, the Supreme Court's decision protected press freedom. Ellsberg avoided prison, and the reckoning led to new safeguards, though imperfect ones, against governmental abuse of secrecy. The Pentagon Papers expose the fatal danger when government serves optics over honesty, politics over people. They prove lasting democracy hinges not on perfect leaders, but on fearless truth-tellers willing to confront institutional rot. In today's world, the same patterns repeat: classified wars, misleading justifications, and journalistic persecution. The Pentagon Papers serve as both warning and roadmap for uncovering the next deep government deception. The truth is clear. The Vietnam War was not just a tragedy of policy, but a scandal of deception. If we fail to learn the lesson of the Pentagon Papers, we guarantee its repetition. Democracy demands vigilance, and it demands accountability, no matter how powerful the perpetrators. What we do with that knowledge, whether demand honesty or accept spin, defines our future as citizens. Next, Watergate, when the cover-up led all the way to the White House. Subscribe for the scandals uncovered.